Welcome to the Pinelander Podcast, the official podcast of Pineland, broadcasting to you from an undisclosed location deep inside Pineland, where we discuss faith, family, finances, firearms, freedom, food, and everything else in between, with those who believe in living free and living out the values that made this country free. All right, welcome to the Pinelander Podcast. My name is Paul LaFavor. I'm here with my ranger buddy, Mike Blackburn, and you're listening to the Pinelander Podcast. This is the podcast for America's Warriors. Today we're talking about a subject that I love, and I hope you do too, is warrior philosophy. We're going to be joined today by our guest and Blacksmith Publishing contributor, retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Jason Dougherty. Welcome, JD.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we couldn't have a discussion on warrior philosophy without having a fellow warrior poet on the podcast. So you definitely
it's okay.
You definitely qualify for that.
Yeah,
Well, that's good to go.
Yeah, so let me just set the stage here. So, most people think, okay, philosophy, it's time to go on to the next podcast. So this is kind of boring, but philosophy, I would say, just in my own words, enables the human mind to think deeply. It enables us to get to a level that penetrates to the deeper level of things, helps us organize our thoughts, helps us systematize our thoughts. So, whatever it is, your philosophy of how to organize a library or a philosophy of gardening or whatever it is. And so when we look at philosophy, it helps us to organize everything into a workable framework. And so when we look at philosophy from a warrior standpoint, we're looking at everything from, our combat in general, war in general,
Control of emotion,
controlling of our emotions, recognizing various patterns in the world, and then bigger things like towards what we would call a virtue, like warrior virtues, warrior truths, those types of things. And
what's right, what's wrong.
Yeah. And so having just said that, we know JD to be a guy that's well-read and a guy that's thought through a lot of these issues. You've had some time to, as a commander, as someone who's seen war, I've experienced all these things, and so you're developing your own version, your own brand of philosophy. It's really just an outworking of your experience, and so I just wanted you to kind of be able to introduce yourself and just talk us through, why philosophy is important to you, why you think it's important to those in the military and things like that,
and warriors today especially. Yeah. I think it's a little different environment we live in too than it used to be. At least when I first joined in the 80s, I think it's almost like crucial that you have some sort of foundation, some sort of framework to work within.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think mental frameworks are necessary when we're young. I think we often are moving too quickly toward whatever it is that we've set our eyes on and don't maybe slow down enough until midlife somewhere, 30s, 40s, whenever that is, to try to make sense of things. And the mental framework, I think it's incumbent upon anybody who is serious about a well-lived life to spend some time thinking about that. There are kind of three buckets for me, philosophy being one of them, but you have history. History provides old solutions to new problems. General Mattis said that if you haven't read hundreds of books, you're functionally illiterate. Personal experience is not enough to sustain you when things get hard. And then you have, I think, psychology, which helps us understand, what makes me tick And then philosophy for me is it's what makes humans tick. It's a way to make sense of the human experience. And Paul, what you said kind of resonated with me in the sense that it helps us order things, to understand the natural order of things, and by that to order our lives accordingly in concert with natural laws, so to speak. So regardless of, say, religious leanings, there are natural laws, and the closer I align my life to those laws, the better off I'll be. And philosophy, there's a guy that I've read, he's died maybe 5 years ago or so, but he was a philosophy chair at Stanford. He was also Christian, a guy named Dallas Willard. And he said all of philosophy over the course of human history boils down to 3 questions. 1, what is the good life? 2, who is a good person? And 3, what's keeping me from that kind of life? And if you can answer those questions, you have a better shot at living something like what Marcus Aurelius simply referred to as a well-ordered life. And the doctrines that we have to carry within us, he said they should be few, fundamental, sufficient at one meeting to wash away all pain and send you back free of resentment to what you must rejoin. And so it's a pathway, philosophy in particular is a pathway to both fully experience, better understand, and make a more significant contribution to the life that we have no choice but to live.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think, that is definitely a foundation. I love I'm going to get an enormous amount of tread off that one quote. It may find its way in a sermon or something like that. But, and I totally agree with you when it comes to, your experiences in the military. Let's just assume everyone who's listening is, serving in the military or has served in the military. And if we don't think critically about who we are and where we've been and where we're going, we could get lost in the sauce, especially if we're a veteran. We've experienced some things. We're trying to figure out what those things mean, and so I think I look at philosophy in that way also, is making sense, because I want to be that good man. I want to make some sense out of that too, making sense out of life, and we know. I know way too many guys who aren't with us anymore because I think they just couldn't think that way, or they didn't see the use in it. I'm not trying to draw an extension into, you don't think this way, you could end up in a bad way, but it's a possibility.
No, I think you just brought up something that I've been thinking about. I'm not sure if it's real or not, but in my perception is today it's very chaotic. I don't remember life really being this chaotic growing up. When I was a young man, thank God, because I didn't have much of a brain back then anyway. But
yeah, me and you both.
I hear you.
My point is, I hate to think of my 20-year-old self, okay, coming of age in today's sort of chaotic world. Because it was really, growing up for me was actually pretty easy. Everybody was lighting you up. If the principal wasn't spanking me at school, my neighbors were freaking hemming me up. My parents were hemming me up. Everybody, their brother's uncle was hemming you up when I was growing up. And, you were going to get in trouble. You were going to do stupid things. You were going to have youthful indiscretion. But it seemed like the world, at least around me, when I was growing up, was relatively ordered. There was sort of this is right and this is wrong, and everybody in the communities were kind of in concurrence with that. There really wasn't any a few outliers, but generally it seemed like the majority of the folks that I grew up around had the same ideas of what right and wrong was, shared the same philosophy. Today, I'm not sure if that's the case. It's very chaotic. It's very confusing. I couldn't imagine being a 20-year-old now trying to figure out, what's right and what's wrong. And I think a really good example of that is what we see here recently in the news going on in Israel with Hamas. A lot of conflict over right and wrong. Was Hamas justified to go into these communities and rape and murder children and women? I mean, this is how crazy it's kind of gotten in today's society. So to me, I think philosophy today is even more important than it was back when I was coming of age.
Yeah, I want JD to chime in here. I totally agree. Things are chaotic, and on that note, I think JD, I know you could wax philosophically, pun intended, about how philosophy starts with awareness. Let me just throw that out there. Maybe that's a good launching off point. Is really when you're 20-something, you may not be thinking in those deeper levels. You're just saying how you can go crush a PT test and whatever else is in your brain at that moment. But I mean, would you agree that philosophy starts with awareness?
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. There are, of course, like psychologically speaking, moments in time that have to do with consciousness that are pivotal and transformative in the life of an individual. From the time you become aware when you're a toddler, consciousness, the first stage of consciousness is that you realize you are a unique entity. Hence the reason toddlers say no so much is because they're asserting their existence as a unique entity. And so they're not flowing anymore. They're saying, no, I'm me. That's what that means. I'm me. And then you have adolescence, and then you have, the brain's not fully developed until you're, say, 25 years old. And so there are different times in a person's life. Men and women seem to differ on the timelines, but the level of consciousness that leads to awareness, I think, is dependent upon the individual's willingness to face the unknown. So we have all of these experiences and things, whether external or internal, and ultimately there has to be a moment of courage in a person's life where they're willing to face or square up to the truth about maybe who they are, the truth about where they came from, the truth about their position in the culture or society in which they live. And like Carl Jung said, that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So there is a moment in time, I think, when we have the ability to make a choice, and for some it's sooner and others later, and some people never get there. But you can make a choice to delve into those things that drive us, the prime movers that exist for us, and to decide whether or not we're okay with it, or to at least attempt to understand it. And there's the idea that you simply can't address, understand, fix, improve, explain things that you're unwilling to face. And so awareness that those things even exist is maybe the first step. And then the next one right behind it is, well, what am I going to do about it? So I have to be willing to, it takes a lot of courage. I think, to face things in ourselves. And ultimately, that for me, that's the point of philosophy, is that I can build what's been, it's called a citadel, the inner citadel. To construct an inner citadel where you have carefully thought through those things, those core principles by which you will live, regardless of what is happening around you. As Admiral Stockdale, 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton, he said his definition of a hero was somebody who refuses the status quo when it does not meet his or her standards. Well, I have to know what my standards are. It's helpful in the military because we're taught what our standards are initially, but then a couple of combat experiences, you're not so sure anymore. Yeah. And so then guys, especially veterans coming back from combat scenarios, everybody's different. So it doesn't have to be a horrible deployment and, to force somebody into a position where they really have to take a look at themselves. But it's an invitation. And that's where I think philosophy can be useful, because it is all of humanity's attempt to make sense of the human experience. And there has been suffering and pain and brutality and all of the things that any of us have ever experienced, and worse. And philosophers have been working through this now for thousands of years. And so it would seem arrogant not to tap into some of that wisdom.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, as we're talking, I know personally, scores of guys, hundreds of guys that, they're called bad names by their wives. They're just emotional infants, and they don't think on any type of deeper level at all. And so they just they get older, they maintain the same habits, good and bad or indifferent, and they never get to this place where they're just looking at their life like, okay, what does it all mean? And I think so. When I was younger, I'll be honest, I look at guys like me and you, I would say they're geeks. They geeked out, because I didn't understand. We mock what we don't understand. But once we're faced with, I think in some ways we're thrusted to either get philosophical and ask these types of questions, or we're just led to despair, to use Kierkegaard's categories. If we don't actually think on this level, it could destroy us, because we're left with all these types of questions, like you posed, Mike. What is that? And then if we don't have
so I'm listening to both of you talking, and I'm thinking something comes to mind, which is sort of like these levels of enlightenment. And so one of the questions I have is, are we sort of thrusted into that next level of enlightenment? Is it a choice? Is it to our detriment if we don't go to the next level of enlightenment? And is there a way to speed the process up, or does it always have to be sort of triggered by our life experiences?
Yeah, JD, please take that.
Yeah, I think that there certainly is choice involved in it. If you use Kierkegaard, he talks about the aesthetic man, the ethical man, and the religious or spiritual man, right? And that's kind of young to old, maybe. Jung would say you have a simple man, complex man, enlightened man. So these three phases, and there are hinge periods between them where So when I'm young, I may be simple. I want to, the simple man and the aesthetic man, those are the same. And that's when we're young. We can be self-aware during that time, say as teenagers, but the things that we want are uncomplicated. We want to have maybe, a cool skateboard and a cool haircut and fit in at school. And we want to have, a home to go to and food to eat. But at some point, we're going to make a transition from that kind of simplicity or aesthetic life and realize that there are more dimensions to life and that we have a role to play. We have opportunities and responsibilities. We begin to feel the weight of it. I know, especially as a man, I did very young. That idea that if it is to be, it is up to me. And everybody has a different version of that. And I think that once you become aware that you have been living in, say, a limited fashion in terms of your worldview, you realize there's more. There isn't no going back. And so at that point, it's a choice, which when we're young, we often make unconsciously. I don't remember making a conscious choice to go to college or join the military or set goals and try to achieve them. That all felt like it came naturally to me. But, we do know, like the Matthew McConaughey's of the world that just try to stay in high school the rest of their lives because they don't want to be adults, right? They don't make that transition. And so you can get stuck in that hinge period, never successfully living the way you were before. And I think where it becomes crucial is later on when you're going from, say, the complex three-dimensional life to something akin to enlightenment, or you're going from the ethical man, as Kierkegaard would say, to the spiritual man. And that transition is, often it's often punctuated by some kind of midlife crisis. But what that crisis means is that the way in which I had viewed the world and ordered my life to be successful, to survive and to thrive, for some reason no longer works for me. And that can mean I'm unfulfilled. It can mean that that the goals that seem so important to me suddenly don't. Maybe I have enjoyed a full career and it's been successful. Maybe I've earned some money. Maybe I have some possessions. And suddenly they don't matter to me the way that I thought they would. It can almost feel like a cosmic joke. Like I have been breaking my back for 20 years or 30 years. I've gotten everything that I thought I wanted and it's empty. And that's both an invitation to something more. And certainly a choice has to be made. And again, you can't go back to it. So you can live the rest of your life, I think, at these crucial points in some kind of purgatory or limbo, and not grow. But those around you, your wives are a great example. You're not the same as you were. They don't necessarily know what's going on. The invitation is to find a spiritual basis for the remainder of your life. And what that looks like is the relocation of your center of gravity from yourself to something higher than yourself. So I go from achievement for me, for my family, the things that I want, the things that I think will define me, I'm proving myself to myself, I'm proving myself to the world. But really, at the bottom of all that, it's all about me. In the military, thankfully, we have a team environment, we have a tribe environment. And so there isn't room in a tribe to be selfish. And so we learn to be unselfish even while even when I really were egoically motivated, because we want to perform for ourselves as much as we do for anybody else. And that works really well in those tight, high-end, well-trained communities. We pull some really amazing things off. But then you get finished with that, and then it's like the movie, I can't remember, Jack Nicholson's in it, and he's like, what if this is all there is?
As good as it gets.
Well, yeah. What if, yeah, exactly. What if this is as good as it gets, right? And you think, man, I've done everything that I set out to do. And, why am I like sad and lonely? And it's just an invitation, I think, to base our lives on something larger than ourselves, our communities and our families, God, pick whatever that is for you. And it's like suddenly that becomes the important thing. And the connection to that, and where philosophy has been particularly useful for me, is that it becomes less about happiness and more about utility. Because when I'm centered on the greater good, we'll just call it that, when I'm centered on the greater good and a principle-driven life, what I want more than anything else is to be useful to people. I want to be useful to my wife and my family and my community and my brothers and sisters in arms. I want to contribute in a way that makes a positive difference. And I'm less concerned about myself. I have fewer desires. Desire is an entire philosophical topic that's fascinating to me. It's desire basically is setting myself up to be disappointed until I get what I want. Right. And so service to the greater good, we learn that in the military to some extent, internalizing that and making that choice when your formal service is over. That's a higher calling.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, you have, as you said, living for something bigger than yourself. That's a big idea. That concept right there is formative. I remember when I became aware of that. Like I was saying, that's what resonated. That's what resonated with me is something you said. Is it begins with awareness, and I think that's when I consciously felt myself maturing. And I've got a long ways to go, but I felt myself mature a lot when I felt the truth of that, living for something bigger than yourself, seeing yourself as, like you said, part of a team. It's more than just, the next badge and the next, next source of honor for yourself, but just seeing yourself as, part of a system, and that's why I like philosophy. I can, but in order to, I think you said this was really good too, is, and akin to it is, I also love history. And in order for something to be meaningful from history, it has to be interpreted, and not just a raw regurgitation of dates and factoids, but like, so what? What does it mean? And so that's why I like philosophy too, is the so what of human experience, making sense. So that, just to latch on to what you just said is, there's many nuggets there, but just kind of get to a place where you see yourself living for something bigger than yourself. Just you're aware of that. I think you become more dangerous to our enemies and, more useful to the guy to the left and right of you.
Absolutely.
Well, I was just wondering if we're doing a decent job of introducing philosophy at the right time. And the reason why I say that is because I think my first philosophy class was in college. And other than what you hear from family, the old guy down the street, sports coaches, right? Athletic coaches. You're always getting sort of a dose of various people's philosophy as you're growing up. But I'm wondering if as important as this is this something that probably ought to be like introduced at a younger age formally, like in secondary education, rather than wait until some guy, whether he may or may not go on to college.
I would endorse it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
And then you've got the other JD. You got that other question: is okay, what type of philosophy? I mean, there's a lot out there. There's now just from hearing you and knowing you a little bit, JD, you have it sounds like a foundation of stoicism. That you also find the use of other aspects, so maybe some existentialism, and then probably some Platonism, Aristotelianism. You got some different isms, but yeah, it's
got all the isms.
Yeah, but what I'm picking up is the fact that it's eclectic, that you're taking the good out of these various systems and you can use them, and they help you form a perspective for your life, and then something like that. Does that make sense? And would you agree?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that I've approached philosophy in the same way that there are a lot of ways that we tend to do that. I mean, think about physical fitness on the teams, or during our career. It's you're going to have an end in mind, some type of goal that you want to accomplish, and then guys that take it seriously, they'll pull from different programs and they'll build their own, and that's maybe unique to them or unique to their team, unique to their circumstances, whether they're in an austere environment or they're in garrison with a full gym. You piece it together based on what you need, what's going to be the most functional for you based on, say, the mission that you're doing. And there's going to be some personal preference baked into that. We're all good at some stuff and not good at other things. And so, physical fitness is always an easy analogy to make for people because we know so much about it. But coming to philosophy is it's the same approach, which it starts with, in my case, consumption of maybe just a vast scope of different philosophies. So I have landed on stoicism as the driving one, and for me, the reason I like it is because it's based on practice. It is the practice of principles. It is very utilitarian, meaning that the magic in any program, whether it's physical fitness or it's religious, with the Bible, or it's with self-help books, you see this, or professionally, you want to be a better leader, or you want to make more money, or whatever. There's so much valuable and good information out there. Where people tend to struggle, I think, is how do I put that into action? Like, what do I do next? Like, that sounds good. I appreciate the motivational 1 hour, YouTube video, but now what? Right? I'm the same dude at the end of it. And so what I liked about Stoicism was they'll talk about principles, and it all boils down to what I can control and what I cannot. And then, okay, what things are within my control? Well, most of those are internal. Okay. Excuse me. So I have my hands full just with that, which takes the pressure off, me thinking that I'm judge, jury, and executioner for the entire world, which is part of the problem that we see. Everybody has an opinion, but not everybody has an informed opinion. And so I can now I know where to focus. So I can focus on the things within my control. And then there's very practical application in a situation like X. Well, what are the types of thoughts that I think to enable me to behave in a way that aligns with the principle? And so I think the practice of philosophical principle, not the rhetoric, is the most important thing. And so one element of that is that I can no longer be concerned with whether or not I'm going to get credit for it. Right? I have to be satisfied with the smallest progress, and I have to treat the outcome of all of my efforts as unimportant, so that I do the work. I mean, consistency is the prime variable. So rhetoric is great and philosophy is great. People, I think, don't delve into philosophy because they think that it's airy and it's academic and it has no application to their day-to-day lives. But that's not the case. So even Aristotle said that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act, but a habit. Yeah. Right? So there are some great books out there on habit, the power of habit in our lives. That's one connection between philosophical principle and who I actually become over time that maybe is easier to understand, but there are a lot of them like that. These aren't abstract ideas. We can create habits that lead us to becoming the type of person who actually naturally behaves in a certain way, naturally thinks in a certain way, responds in a certain way. That's applicable in military service. It's applicable in business, in our families. Am I the kind of guy who loses his temper or am I not? Well, I don't get to decide that in the moment. I have to practice the kinds of things that when that moment occurs in my life, I don't lose my temper because I'm the type of person who doesn't.
Yeah.
Just as an example.
Yeah. So the philosophy of warriors, would you say that is the philosophy of warriors, that stoicism, or is there something else that also comes to mind?
I think in the practical sense, it's the most accessible. Stoicism doesn't require a great deal of processing, nor does it require what they call a classical education. Like Stoicism, Epictetus, he wrote a philosophical handbook called the Enchiridion for Roman soldiers. Very practical, right? And so accessibility is a big part of that. And so I think in that way, Stoicism was for me more accessible because I'm not an academic philosopher. It made sense to me just reading it as a young captain, just an infantry guy. And from there, it's meant different things. I mean, with any great literature, it's like I can read it today and I can read it again in 5 years, and it's like an entirely different book. And so that's what I discovered with Epictetus. Was the first philosopher that I encountered, and incidentally, it was Admiral James Stockdale, who I quoted earlier, who spent 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton, 5 of those in solitary confinement, was awarded a Congressional Medal of Honor for what he did with his fellow inmates there, many of whom credited him with saving their lives, not physically, but because he taught them stoicism. And so that has, in semi-modern day terms, as modern as I can think of now, has been put to the test and was very effective. It enabled guys to survive ongoing torture and abuse and not lose their personal dignity and not die of broken hearts, which is what Stockdale said was happening, because they felt like they'd let everyone down if they gave up any information when they were being tortured by a professional torturer. And so he had to change the rules. And so there is a test case available to anyone willing to read about it that proves the value of it in the most difficult scenarios. And certainly, if it will work in Hanoi Hilton, it will work when I have a bad day at work. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's how I came to find it. And you know, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, that's a just one principle that I know from the Enchiridion, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but an Epictetus or Epictetus, but his idea, I think it begins with focus on what you can control. So that's what I'm hearing you say is like,
yes,
just like a super huge principle is focus on what you can control, and you could take the trajectory of that and stretch it over much of life.
Yeah, to even like someone that I think we've talked to in the past, you know, the author of the Gulag Archipelago, where it's like, you know, completely sort of introverted in how he looks at everything. I mean, everything comes back to him, you know, to the individual. Even things that you would scratch your head and say, well, Mike, you know, how are you taking responsibility for, you know, these things that are taking place on a world stage? But he seems to be able to do that, and I think it's kind of refreshing if especially some of the philosophies getting thrown around today, where everybody's a victim.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. It goes back to a life based on self-interest. So victimhood is a form of self-obsession, right? It's very difficult for me to remain a victim when my concern is for others and not for myself. There's no place for it. Like, it loses its charge. And like, you know, Solzhenitsyn in Gulag Archipelago, he said that every man always has handy a dozen glib little reasons why he is right not to sacrifice himself. That was the summation of how that happened. You know, how did it go from they're arresting supposedly criminals and traitors to they're arresting women and children when they had run out of people to populate the work camps? The narrative continued to change, but he said really it was the common person refusing to sacrifice themselves in the moment that, as a collective wave, allowed the Gulag Archipelago to happen. And so what we see happening with that, in my opinion, like in my estimation, is that when you have however many millions of people who are self-obsessed, what that means is that no one's willing to sacrifice themselves to make a difference. And if they don't, well, there's some quote about that, like, all it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. Something along those lines.
That's it.
But in the Gulag Archipelago, that's what he just so brilliantly lays out, is that everybody would just turn the other way. Right? It never seemed like a big enough deal to do anything about it right now. And I don't want to get in trouble. Like, I don't want to lose my job. I don't want my neighbors to turn me in.
I don't want to get canceled.
Has.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody has a dozen glib little reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly, I think, what we're seeing ourselves today.
Mm-hmm.
The hardest thing to find today, I think, is moral courage in people. And when it shows up, it's just like you just found a diamond. It's just like, man.
Right.
I mean, it really is. It's
Right.
refreshing. I mean, it used to be some decades ago. I mean, you would run into it quite often. Now, when you see it, it's just like, man, that's just remarkable because it's so rare.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, my and I think the reason that shows like this are important is because our interest, of course, is the warrior class, and so I'm always trying to figure out, what do we need to do collectively as a class, as a group of men, to take this thing, up a notch, to hopefully save, this idea. Where I start, to me, it's as clear as day. I think it's clear as day for most people. We're just kind of watching a degradation of society and civilization, and things that seem to be falling apart. And so, what does the warrior class need to do to, stand in the breach?
What do you say there, JD? That's a big question.
It is a big question. And I think that it always begins with, to counter kind of the Gulag Archipelago scenario, it begins with a single man or woman taking responsibility for themselves first. It's kind of like the Jordan Peterson idea that if you want to change the world, the first thing you need to do is clean your room, right? If your house is not in order, you have no business out in the world preaching to people about how they ought to be doing their business. And so I think we learn, the warrior class learns how to sacrifice. We learn how to not get what we want. We learn how to serve and to work on teams for the benefit of others. We have a head start on that. But when that's over, particularly, guys that are in now, there is a difference between meeting the standard and setting a higher standard for yourself, taking responsibility for yourself in a way that the standard becomes irrelevant. External standards become irrelevant. The idea that I will work toward becoming the type of person who doesn't have to worry about societal standards because mine are so much higher. And so personal responsibility is where it always begins. And I think the younger people are these days, that's the lesson they need to learn the most. That's, victimhood or any kind of idea that the world owes me something, that has to be crushed, just dispensed with. That I'm here to make a contribution, not to receive a handout. And that, I mean that emotionally, I mean that financially, I mean that in every single way. And going back to that tribal idea again, we've had the luxury, especially in the US, of being insulated by our prosperity so that we can become concerned with trivial matters and focus on ourselves, and not nobody, but there's a growing portion of the population that no longer thinks that they're responsible for anything, including themselves. So I think for us as the warrior class, or people who are having conversations like this, we must first take responsibility for ourselves, and then our families and communities. And then if enough of us do that, then we at the very least, ought to set some kind of example. Because the Stoics will tell you, like, I have no control over anybody else. But if I can demonstrate in some kind of way the type of life or be the type of person that somebody would want to have that, some young kid would look at me and say, I want to be like that guy. It's as simple as that. I want to have the kind of life he has. I want to be as reliable as he is. I want people to be able to count on me. I want to be like that. And so if we can model it effectively enough and enough of us do it, then we have to be open to the idea that there are people all around us all the time who are looking for something more. And we can't give away what we don't have. So we have to have it first and then be prepared to give it away.
Yeah. Well, something that I always think about too is you have scripture, and then you have a lot of the famous philosophers. And looking at both of these, looking at scripture and looking at some of the famous philosophers and obviously the useful information that they provide. Have you found a problem reconciling those two worlds, if you will?
Well, ultimately, no. I will say, so I grew up a fundamentalist Christian, like a very strict Christian faith. And my parents started out as, they were hippies. Well, my dad was a sailor, which I guess is the same thing as being a hippie. And then my mom, she was a full-blown hippie. And so then they got married, and then they got saved.
Had little hippie children.
Oh yeah, man. And like my mom said, the first 6 months or a year after she got saved, they used to have Bible studies, and they'd sit around and smoke pot and drink beer and read the Bible, and they were having the time of their lives, man. And so, from that it moved into a little bit of Southern Baptist, a little bit of tent revival flavor, very kind of spirit filled, go to church 3 times a week. And so then I went to college and I did, before I started studying philosophy and psychology, I did a ton of spiritual research for about 10 years. And then got introduced to some of these other things. And so initially I thought it's one or the other, but if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell, he was a comparative mythologist credited with creating that as an academic genre, like say in the 60s, maybe 70s. And he studied myth and religion across space and time for all of written human history, and was a man of some faith, though was very careful not to, he wasn't public about it because he didn't want it to influence, people's opinion of his work, that he wanted to stand on his own. But somebody asked him directly if his study of religion and myth across all of time had eroded his faith, his personal faith. And he said no, that it had strengthened it, because what he found were central truths that occurred again and again. And so when it comes to reconciliation between the Bible that I grew up with, and I'm very familiar with, and the things that I've learned over the last, particularly over the last decade, but say over the last 2 decades, there are central truths. And whether, there is a brand of philosophy, that phenomenology, which is that truth cannot be told, it can only be experienced. So a human learns what truth looks like by living it, by experiencing it. And so what I see again and again in philosophy and in many different religions, and certainly in my own upbringing in the Christian faith, I see so many similarities that it becomes undeniable proof that there are some principles that transcend any quibbling, and that we would be wise to pay attention to, because they are the ones that have stood the test of time and appear in different forms again and again. It's like a key. It's like a manual for how to be a human and have a reasonably good experience doing it.
Yeah, having said that, I agree with you, JD. One thing, maybe I just exfoliate myself here. I didn't know we would go this route, but this is good. We ended up here. When you talk about reconciling philosophy and the Word of God. So I happen to believe in the statement that all truth is God's truth. So I believe there are philosophers that get it right, and when they do, it's truth, and then oftentimes they get it wrong. So I can read Plato's dialogues, and I can be in full agreement with the truth that he is drawing out through perhaps some of the made-up characters. But then in other ways, he can be completely wrong. As far as some of the things that he would that I wouldn't agree with, and it won't mesh with my Christian faith. I guess my point is, and I think what you're saying is that we can do that as well. We don't have to dismiss philosophy and outright saying it is inconsistent with the Bible and our Christian faith, but we can take the truths as we find them, use them as common grace insights. For my tradition, would use those terms that sometimes the pagans get it right, and we can use those insights, and
Sure.
They'll help us, in our life. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, I would agree with it. I mean, if you approach philosophy from a scripture-based life, I mean, there is a scripture that encourages us to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. It is the responsibility of every individual to work it out. Well, what does that mean? So first you have to decide what salvation means, and then you have to decide what working it out means. But in the end, it's the codification of your belief system so that it aligns with the Bible, which is certainly not it's not exclusive of truth in any form. The words of Jesus in particular are interesting along those lines, because the echo of the point of many of his messages is seen elsewhere. And so it is I think up to the individual to work out their salvation. And what I mean by that is the principles by which I will live my life, because I believe in my core they are irrefutable truths. And so then it becomes easy I can then filter anything that I see or read, whether it's text or it's someone's behavior. That's an easy filter for me, if I'm spiritually fit in that way. If I'm not, then I don't know. And so again, I think that comes down to the responsibility of the individual to know what they believe and why they believe it. It takes work, right? So it's okay for my parents to tell me what to believe and me just to believe it the rest of my life. Plenty of people do that. But I haven't earned the ability to make judgments of my own in terms of what I'm willing to allow in and what I'm not. Everything has to remain black and white for me, because confronted with a gray area, then I don't have the tools to parse it out myself. And so for me, I think to be particularly useful in the carrying out of my faith or my principle-driven life, or to be the expression of my true belief system, there's a responsibility there for me to do some work so that I understand it well enough. That either it's not so that I can defend it, it's simply that it's like with counterfeit money. They don't train bank tellers to recognize counterfeit money by showing them counterfeit money. They make them handle real money thousands of times. And so they can tell by feeling a counterfeit bill that it's not real. It has to be that way with us too. And that's where discipleship and discipline and consistency comes in. So that I don't have to explain to you what I don't believe. I just know when I see it.
Yeah, that's good. These are fantastic insights that I think no doubt will help us out. And, I, for one, have gotten a lot out of our discussion today. So, JD, thank you for spending an hour with us. In the G-Base, we had an overflight, as you heard, so we may have to get blown out. But
they're always trying to
it's always motivating.
They're always trying to find the G-Base, JD.
Yeah.
I hear you.
But, yeah, I appreciate your time. And, guys, I'm excited about the book that JD has forthcoming. We teased out some of the ideas. But, hey, if you were listening today and you thought that was provocative, then, we have some various titles that go down those lines. But and in the meantime, before that comes out, you can just think on a deeper level. If I could just, close out with a couple of big nuggets that I got out of today's discussion. That is really, be aware. Maybe you haven't thought in those ways yet, but, we have a great tradition as guardians of the Republic. We have what was handed to us, there was a lot of blood and treasure spent. And so that deserves time to think that through. And not only that, but, if you're a husband and a father, then you really need to think in these ways too, because people depend upon you to think that way. And think a little bit deeper than just, what's for dinner and what's on TV later. I mean, think through some bigger things, and this will help you, I think, organize your life. And in turn, you'll be more productive, you'll be happier, you'll be,
have a purpose.
Yeah, we have a purpose. And so there's so much here, and we've just scratched the surface of the wealth of the endowment that we have of humanity that's available for us to tap into and use it. I think we would be foolish not to do that. So I think, so JD, thank you for going through some of those. There's so much there that I think, you could listen to this podcast 4 or 5 times and get more and get a little something different each time. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
I've enjoyed the conversation. Like listening to y'all, I always learn something when I'm talking to y'all, and I have revelations that come out of my mouth like I knew them before, but really I didn't. I just thought of it right then because you said something that made me think of it. So I'll leave you with 2 things. One is it's a Stoic idea. Summum bonum means we are made for each other.
I like it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And as a warrior class, we know that, but remember it. We are made for each other, and we are made to serve the communities in which we live. And the next one is, I know we got Christmas coming up, so I hope y'all have a very Merry Christmas and get to spend it with your families and people that you love. And I'll look forward to talking to y'all again soon.
Well said. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Pinelander Podcast. If you enjoy our unique content, please consider supporting our sponsors. SOF News provides special operations news from around the world. It's where Paul and I go to keep abreast of what's going on within the SOF community. Check them out at sof.news. American Partisan. It's the vanguard movement of Western civilization. Be sure to check them out at americanpartisan.org. And, of course, Blacksmith Publishing. We've been serving the warrior class since 2013. They have great titles written for warriors, by warriors. If you're looking for excellent reference material or just want to enjoy a great novel, be sure to check out the bookstore. Or if you enjoy hanging out with warriors, come spend some time with us in the G-Base over at the Pinelander Podcast. All that's at blacksmithpublishing.com. Until our next meeting, stay mentally and tactically smart, physically and spiritually strong, and socially astute. To each other we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. May God continue to bless Pineland.